Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's 9:32. We have quorum. We have two people, Paul Banfield and Jelinka, on Zoom. We also have now understand that the two councillors are still members of this committee until the end of the month, and so we may be expecting one or both of them at some point. That was a change that happened and was realized it hadn't really happened properly. So, welcome. Calling the meeting to order. You have an agenda. Additions to the agenda. Seeing none then, look for a mover for the agenda. Moved by, I think her name's Janine. Seconder by Don, thank you. Discussion. And seeing none, those in favor of the agenda as printed. Those opposed. And that carries. Confirmation of the minutes of September. I have had no notifications of any changes, any errors or anything. Does anybody want to add to those? If not, then looking for a mover for the minutes of September 21st. Moved by Don, seconded by Jane. Both of you were there, thank you. Any further discussion? And seeing none, those in favor of approving the minutes of September 21st as printed. Good, thank you. Pecuniary interest, any known at this time? And as ever, if it suddenly comes up that you realize you forgot, please say so as soon as possible. Presentations, I don't believe there are any. Delegations, I don't believe there are any. Briefings. So business then, the final recommendation of the Heritage Kingston Review Working Group.
Hello. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity just to introduce this report. It has triggered some response, and we wanted to take the opportunity to make sure that everybody was comfortable with the material that was being presented, and particularly any concerns or questions that had been raised in the time since committee saw it or that it was presented to council. I could go on for quite some time, and I won't, so I will do my best to be quite succinct in reviewing what has been discussed and where we're at today. If there are questions after, of course, I'm available and readily available to talk about any concerns any committee members may have. So the Heritage Kingston Review Working Group mandate, which you would have been familiar with from a report you received prior, is just a review, was to review the composition mandate and procedures of the Heritage Kingston Committee. This was to include consultation with community stakeholders, past members of the committee, current members of the committee, public, applicants, agents, and interested members in heritage within the Kingston community. Additionally, the working group was to review the past findings of the transition team report and the prior consultations that occurred with committees. The working group was also required to work within the legal advice of the City of Kingston in its interpretation of the Ontario Heritage Act and any implementation of the clauses therein. The findings of the Heritage Kingston Review Working Group then were brought to City Council as dictated by that mandate. Just to review the timeline that brought us to today, this committee was consulted on the recommendations of the working group after over 2 years of working group effort. That report came to Heritage Kingston in May of 2022. Feedback was received from members, thank you all, until the 31st. Some offered in person, some offered by written submission, and we then met as a working group on June 7th. And we reviewed that, we made some minor alterations to the report. We actually created a new exhibit, Exhibit G, which references the recommendations that were offered by the committee. And we then moved forward. It's important to note that on September 20th, we became aware that a report would be moving that would speak to the composition, the nomination, and the procedures around committee formation, specifically through an EDI lens. Committee members did raise questions about how we would support a more diverse and equitable committee structure. And so it was important to us that we would see the result of this process. Not because it has any immediate direct impact, save for one area, which is term of committee. This report then was finalized, as had always been the intention, and moved to Council on October 4th. Council then had a recommendation from Councillor Stroud that it be referred back to committee for consideration of the recommendations. And then that was scheduled for October 26th. That meeting did not have quorum. So here we are today, finally having this opportunity to hear from committee about the recommendations that Council ultimately received. And pending the outcome of this meeting, the report will then move back to Council on December 6th. I think it's important to note, as I already have, that the feedback from the committee was incorporated in the report that was offered to Council. There's an entire appendix that speaks very specifically to what was shared. We made amendments, we made a list of additional recommendations that are less procedural and more kind of things that need to be considered moving forward. Conversations with nominations committee, discussions about access to technology, I know was raised by a committee member. So we added that to a list of recommendations that are now part of Exhibit G. And you can see the addition of the direct recommendation that staff be asked to implement those recommendations as able. The other changes that the committee would note between the report that you saw in May and the report that was brought to Council, I want to speak to them because there have been questions raised about where they came from. The first is the change from the committee term from 6 years to 4. This change was mandated by the change in the procedures for committees that were adopted by Council on September 20th. So after the committee saw this, Council made a change. They said committee terms are now 4 years, and therefore we had to change the committee term, else we would be in conflict with the bylaw that mandates terms of committees. So that is where that change came from. The other change was the removal of the land use planning reference in the terms of reference. We had a letter from the Frontenac Heritage Foundation also noting this removal. And what I wanted to make clear is the removal was not intended to remove the process. In fact, the process remains in the procedural bylaw for heritage. The removal of this item from the terms of reference is because every aspect of the procedural bylaw is not in the terms of reference. The terms of reference is meant to allow us to recruit committee members with a clear understanding of what their role will be. And when people started to see that this was included in the terms of reference, the question became, what is the role of Heritage Committee against the role of Planning Committee? So not wanting to confuse applicants, but understanding we do take matters of planning before committee. Union Park is a very strong example of a successful consultation with committee on a matter. We removed it from the terms of reference only. So it remains in the procedural bylaw. The committee will continue to see the planning matters that it sees presently. All we have done is hopefully limit any confusion about what the roles of the two committees are on the top. So you see clause 24 here, which is from the procedural bylaw for heritage, speaks specifically to consultation on matters of planning that are impacted by or covered by the Ontario Heritage Act. So the key recommendations the committee has previously seen, or the key focus here, is to modify the existing committee to focus on matters related to the Ontario Heritage Act, as that is the majority of the business that this committee sees. To create then a separate committee named the Heritage Programs Committee, which would look specifically at things like museums, collections, community programming, etc. That was the recommendation you saw when we brought this forward in May. That is the key recommendation that stays on the floor in regards to the mandate, if you will, of the entire committee. The other major change we are proposing through the working group is this 3-stream approval process. So now we're limiting ourselves only to the discussion of one aspect of the prior mandate, speaking specifically to the approval process. The major change here, I know this is hard to see, it is in your agenda package, so please reference it if need be. And I just highlighted a few things that are important to note. The addition of a roundtable. That will allow interested members of the community, interested members of Heritage Committee to see and meet with applicants who are interested, to see the process by which staff will help to stream the applications and have early opportunity to consult with those individuals in a non-binding way. This was the desire to have opportunity for interested members to communicate with applicants and talk about options outside of those we already had. The roundtable then is followed by the streaming of applications. Applications will then either move into the first stream, which is largely what we've right now called delegated approvals. Then it would move either into one of two, Stream 2 or Stream 3. Stream 2 is basically Part 4 applications as you understand them today. You're going to receive them as a committee. You're going to have opportunity to alter the recommendations. You will then vote on them. The difference here is that once the recommendation is approved, assuming the recommendation is approved by committee, if staff agree with any alterations that were made, or if the recommendation remains the same, and the applicant are satisfied by this, the permit would be issued. It would not go to council, taking an additional 2 weeks for council to approve something that the majority of the time, if committee, applicant, and staff agree, gets approved at council. The other aspect is if we don't agree, then it does what in planning we would have called a bump up. It will automatically go to council, who holds the decision-making authority under the Act. Staff cannot refuse a permit. If we refuse a permit, it has to go to council because we do not have that authority. The other Stream 3 process is the Part 5 process as we understand it today. Part 5 applications come to committee. Committee makes comment over dash. You confirm your comments, you support or not support the recommendation then that goes up to council. Council is the ultimate decision maker on Part 5 recommendations. So some things to take away from this. We've got a roundtable now. This was to respond very specifically to the concern that there wasn't early interaction between applicants, interested members of the community, and interested members of committee prior to staff forming an opinion. Site visits continue. Opportunities for committee members to attend before staff reports have been written to help to understand their concerns, to offer suggestions, etc. These continue. Dash comments continue. Opportunity for committee to offer input, which is reported on in your reports you receive from staff. Oftentimes we speak to how it has altered or been shared with the applicant, their response, and any changes that have resulted. And then finally, we have, of course, the opportunity, like today, for committee to offer feedback in session. Some other important points to note: Stream 1 approvals take between 10 and 15 days. Stream 2 approvals, where the permit is issued after discussion at committee on Part 4s, take 45 days. These are sort of the worst case scenarios, knowing they could all take 90 days if they ended up bumping up through the legislation. And Stream 5 take, on average, between 60 and 90 days. So those are important numbers to keep in mind. It's also important to keep in mind, and I actually should have included Stream 2 in this little comment here, the permits that are issued in Stream 1, the permits that are then issued in Stream 2 after the committee meeting will be reported on at the next meeting of the committee. This is to respond to a concern that the committee was not being informed as frequently as they would like on the use of delegated authority, and also noting that if we all agree and we issue a permit at Stream 2, or if we don't agree, and you guys need to know that it bumped up to council or it didn't. So that's why this was built in through the working group, to have that accountability and that transparency. A couple of other things I wanted to note, excuse me, in relation to the delegated authority specifically. I should have brought water. Is the delegated authority was a discussion from day one of this working group. This working group met for over 2 years. We met through a pandemic. We had very intense conversations at many points, and we had understood a plan and an agreement. And so that is what the report reflected. What I wanted to share here is the delegated authority discussion that was even held in 2016 was bifurcated. There were several members of the existing Municipal Heritage Committee who did not agree with any expansion of delegated authority. There were many who did. And so in 2016, the comment was made that more delegated authority was needed so that the committee was not being asked to duplicate staff work and review every request. Some at the time even felt less delegated authority was needed with greater transparency. So this is baked back in to these early discussions. And even in 2016, when there was a recommendation that we could have more delegated authority to process more applications more efficiently, that was not the decision that was taken. So the delegated authority was not vastly expanded. The Heritage Kingston Review Working Group then, when we discussed this in our earliest of days, you can see the key focus moving forward became for the working group that we find an appropriate and transparent use of granted authority to provide opportunities for engagement with committee when appropriate, and to streamline and simplify the approval process for repair and maintenance approvals and minor alterations to heritage properties. This is where the streaming gets its root. This is where we start to see how staff can process those 10 to 15-day permit applications, but committee can be engaged earlier in the process through the roundtable if desired. This is amplified through what we heard back from the community at large. Remember, one of the mandates of the committee or the working group was to look to community consultation and input. We did surveys with past applicants, past agents, property owners, interested members of the heritage community, past members of the heritage committee, and current members of the heritage committee. This was done by a third-party consultant to ensure that we were not biasing the input. Now, what we heard was then summarized. This is in Exhibit C of the report. But what we heard overall in the term of delegated authority was that staff should be provided additional delegated authority with a shared understanding by all of best practices. And this intent was around time, to speed up and streamline the application approvals for applications, particularly those that are minor in nature and have very little to no impact on the heritage attributes themselves. So we worked under these ideas. We received further conversation, and we discussed, even after the May meeting of Heritage Kingston, we again discussed delegated authority. And at that time, one of the things we came to, as we had understood it in that moment, recognizing as well that I'm not just a staff member on this matter, I'm actually the chair of the working group. And so I am here representing not only myself, but the working group and the comments that I am sharing about the comprehensive feedback we received. But the working group did agree at the meeting that comprehensive review of the delegated authority was needed. And we also agreed that the permit approvals in Stream 1 should be pursued using the existing delegated authority to ensure that the delegated authority list, when reviewed, was reviewed comprehensively, was reviewed with greater input from people, recognizing that our working group had left, at this point we were pushing 3 years, and that we needed to make the changes to improve the process. And we could then recommend that we come back and deal more specifically with greater insight on the use of delegated authority and what is often referred to as the list. Now, many people who offered feedback throughout those years said the list is important to them. It offers clarity. When they look to the list and they don't just see anything that doesn't impact heritage attributes, that is not assuring to someone, as it is when they see soffits, fascia, which are repaired, are covered under delegated authority. That offers some greater clarity of direction. So we realized after this went to council and we saw some feedback from some members of the working group that we needed to actually bake that recommendation into the report, because it wasn't sufficient that we had just talked about it at the working group. We needed to actually put it in writing so everyone knew the intent was earnest. And so that's what we've added. I'm actually excited to see this added to the report. I think it's a great addition. It clarifies our intent moving forward. And we've asked council then to direct staff as part of the 2023 work plan that we would review the delegated authority list in particular to ensure that we are all comfortable with it and that the reporting structures around it are appropriate. And that really does go back to the very first slide about what was the mandate of the working group. The mandate of the working group was not actually to go through the procedural bylaw for heritage. The mandate of the working group was to look at the composition, the mandate of this committee, and the procedures that govern the behavior of the committee within this chamber. Knowing that delegated authority plays a role in that, when we think about what the committee sees, we did expand it, but we did not have direction to do a comprehensive assessment of a document like this that is so impactful and was obviously referenced and re-referenced throughout our consultation period. It's needed, staff agree. We just don't think the time to do it is to do it quickly and without that deeper dive and opening up the consultation opportunity to as many voices as we can. So that all being said, oh, thank you. That all being said, I'm going to wrap it up there. I appreciate your patience for that extended introduction, and I am happy to take any questions now or at any point through the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You okay? Yeah. And Councillor Oosterhoff is now with us. Yes. Just welcome Councillor Oosterhoff back for another meeting. Questions? Councillor Oosterhoff, you had a hand.
Yes, good morning. I apologize. I was actually here at 20 after 9, but I didn't realize I had the wrong screeners. I have no idea what happened there. But thank you to Elizabeth for figuring this out. But I could hear you. I just want to thank the director for that presentation. It may be the first time I've heard it, but I really like it. Maybe I didn't know why I didn't hear it very well before. It's probably the third time, but I think it's well done, and I'm prepared to be supportive of it. It's excellent work done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jennifer.
How would something like that, that air vent that came like about 2 months ago that we went through here, which would be fairly minor, how would that go through the new process?
Sorry, I don't want to confuse the question. Are we talking about an application which was to add air vents?
Yeah, to the exterior, is there to sort of raise and move the air vents?
Right, and there was a recommendation from staff not to support and support from committee to not support.
Yeah, and I guess I'm wondering, like, you guys are like not allowed to not, or you were saying you can't deny a permit.
Yeah.
I was just wondering how that would work in that case. It would have been under like a minor, and then how that would sort of complicate your guys' life and need
Yeah.
sort of the support of us.
It's fairly uncommon that we see applications like that. I know when that denial came in from staff, we actually did have a discussion about it because it's fairly uncommon for staff not to be able to work with an applicant to find something that we could at least issue a support recommendation around, whether the applicant was completely in line with it or not. But I would say in that situation, it would bump up through all streams. So if it was a delegated approval and staff could not support it, it would bump up. If it was part 4, it would come through stream 2. If at the end of stream 2 there was disagreement from the 3 parties, the committee, staff, and the applicant, it would bump up again to stream 3. But if at stream 2 we somehow came to a resolution and the applicant was in favor, or we declined it and the applicant accepted that decline, then it could be not issued after that point. Sorry, that's wrong. The decline would actually have to go up to council. So any non-support from committee would have to go up to council. Sorry for that confusion. But yeah, it would bump essentially through the streams as appropriate, which is happening right now if we think about it that way. Like, don't think of it as like we did this stream and now we're starting again. Like, stream 1 basically leads into stream 2. Stream 2 naturally flows into stream 3. You will not as a committee have stream 2 meetings and stream 3 meetings. Essentially what you will have is what we have today. You'll be dealing with part 4s. The difference is whether or not a permit gets issued after the meeting or if the applicant is required to go to council to see that final decision. Thanks.
Done.
Yes, thanks for the presentation, Jennifer. And I think the committee really should acknowledge the tremendous amount of work you did in organizing the review working group and producing this report. And certainly I think the committee is supporting some of these major recommendations and looking forward to improvements. Still have some questions, and let me start with, well, I was glad that you referenced the changes in the report that's before us now compared to what came before. And one of the minor ones was that previously the report called for weekly meetings of the roundtable, and the word weekly disappeared. Can you explain?
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, that is a great question, Don, and I'm sorry it didn't end up on the slides. The only reason for the removal of weekly was to not mandate a meeting if we didn't have reports coming in. So we have a cycle for applications. We tend to get applications at the very end of the month or the very beginning of the month. And so again, it was a minor alteration only to make it so that staff weren't having to schedule and coordinate weekly roundtable meetings where there were no applications to be considered, because our structure actually sort of pushes them to a specific timeline. That being said, they could be as often as weekly if needed, particularly around DAs, because again, that 10 to 15 day time period could see an application come in and potentially be worked on and dealt with in that regard. So yeah, the removal was not intended to diminish the role of the roundtable at all. It was really to reflect the reality of how our application cycle works. But thank you for noting that. I missed that in my updates.
Yes, I'd also like some clarification about the reference to the Heritage Committee providing input on land use planning applications, and you explained you removed it there, but it's not really going to disappear without knowing about it. But I'm a little concerned because I really don't quite understand how it works. You mentioned that in the case of the Prison for Women project, we were consulted, and I think it was very important that we were, and I think we were helpful. But other projects, we didn't seem to have any input. I think there's an application going forward around the Renaissance venue building or nearby, which is a designated building, and we never heard about that. Of course, we know there's the Homestead Tower on Queen Street behind SNR. SNR, very important designated property. Committee never heard about that. So what is the policy, and what is the policy going to be?
That's fair, and the comment is actually on the existing policy, nothing to do with what is actually before us through the report today, so I just want to make that clear. The removal of the clause from the terms of reference doesn't change how land use planning is actually spoken to in the procedural bylaw. So we're not talking about anything actually that has to do with the working group's recommendations. We're talking more broadly about how our land use planning matters involving Heritage Committee and when. So if the property is designated in the procedural bylaw, obviously it has to follow the requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act, which includes consultation with the Heritage Committee on those changes. Where in the planning process that happens is dependent on what the size, the scale, the intents of the development, and the approvals that are required. So when we had Union Park, for example, we also additionally had direction from council to reconsider the Part 4 designation on that property to consider how it might support use down the line. So we brought those applicants to Heritage Committee through actually a procedural step that is pre-consultation as requested by the director. Not because there was a specific land use planning process that mandates a heritage approval. So that is a best practice, not a requirement under the Ontario Heritage Act. What the procedural bylaw speaks specifically to are the requirements under the Ontario Heritage Act, which is that properties that have designations require additional to planning, land use planning consideration. They require an approval through heritage. And so what the procedural bylaw is referencing there is situations where the property is designated and therefore requires an approval process. Some of what you're describing are properties adjacent to a development where it is not the development itself which is designated, and matters of adjacency certainly could come to committee, but there's no permitting process for this, so it would be as an act of consultation only. That is how the procedural bylaw would be structured in that matter, because this committee has no authority to issue an approval on something which deals more with the adjacency clauses there. So we would hope to continue to do that. I will unfortunately reference a bit the elephant in the room, which is Bill 23. Which does change some of the planning processes, and it also limits some of the considerations, specifically at site plan control, which will have an impact on what heritage considerations might be considered at that time, which actually, importantly for this committee, will make the consultation under the Heritage Act even more important when we're looking at development applications, because we won't be able to have the same kind of rich heritage dialogues at planning committee that we also could be having at this committee. I'm going to turn to Ryan, who's also had a lot of experience in bringing matters between the two committees. I just want to make sure that there isn't anything procedurally that he might want to add. So not the core function of the committee, certainly, but an important part, as we all well recognize when we have major developments happening in Kingston.
Sir, I just want to interrupt there for a moment and apologize. Under other business, I have written down here that there will be a report on Bill 23, and it's quite serious implications on heritage, and we'll do that under other business at the end of the meeting. Don, you had another question?
Yes, well, thanks, Jennifer, for the explanation. I guess I'm concerned to hear what Bill 23 says. I think it's important that heritage committees at least have some input. I mean, whether or not we have any authority to stop or to make to object to an application, I think at least providing input is a valuable operation, and I hope it is exercised often. Okay, so I'm comfortable with that. The other point that you referenced, and which has been a big trouble for many of us for many years, is delegated authority. We are not against delegated authority. We think it's good. I'm glad that I can see that the current report and recommendations should increase delegated authority approvals. What our problem is that staff are approving applications under delegated authority without consulting the committee. And as I've explained many times, delegated authority bylaw gives gives a delegate the power to approve an application, but since council has to consult the committee, so does the delegate. And that has been made very clear for many years. So the real question is, well, I know you have spoken to this review group working under the legal advice of the city. Where is the legal advice of the city on this matter? I've never heard it. And to me, it's very clear that the city is not following the legal advice of the ministry. So I think I'm not satisfied that you intend to, council intends to look again at delegated authority sometime in the unforeseeable future. I think this review group was an opportunity to clarify something that should have been clear long ago. So I think we should still deal with this matter now as we can, and I hope the committee will follow that road. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you. I'm certainly not a lawyer, so I'm not going to offer a legal opinion on this. However, I will clarify. The ministry never issued a legal opinion on this. There was a member of the ministry who circulated an email referencing that some discussion with a legal counsel had occurred at the ministry. The ministry actually recommended that all municipal heritage committees and municipal entities consult with their own legal experts on these matters. That was completed. The legal opinion of the City of Kingston was then issued on this matter, and we proceed under that direction. So that is why this was not included in the mandate of the committee. Don, I know it has been a particular concern of yours. I wish that I could echo that concern has been amplified through the consultation and through the other people who informed the working group. It did not. Certainly other members of the working group raised similar concerns about this process, but it was not all of the working group, and it certainly was not all of those who fed in. And the proposal that you draw criticism to, again, I am not a lawyer or offering a legal position, there are many municipal heritage committees that function under very similar legal advice. And so this is not aberrant. It is not Kingston acting against the Municipal Heritage Act, the Ontario Heritage Act. It is us acting as we are meant to do under the legal advice of the City of Kingston as directed by Council.
Well, I'm disappointed by that, because my understanding of what happened 6 or 7 years ago is not the same as that. And we have had opinions from several experts, legal experts, lawyers on this matter. And we're intelligent people here. We can read the ministry's opinion. It is absolutely clear. And I'm disappointed that we can't, I hope we can still do something to follow the Ontario Heritage Act in this respect, but perhaps that will come back later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from members of the committee? Jane.
Great, and thanks. I really appreciated the whole overview. It was a long report, and I liked the summary. I do have a couple of questions, though. one of my concerns is about the adjacent properties, and I understand that that's really not something we're discussing here, but it is always a concern. It's a concern of councillors and homeowners, et cetera. The other thing I would like to just touch on is I have read the EDI. I think it was a draft report that I saw, but anyway, I understand the whole concept of a term appointment. However, I think I would like to make the point that every advisory committee requires a different skill set and amount of time commitment and involvement. And I think we need to be cautious about stipulating limiting terms of appointments. For me, it's been a major time commitment to become conversant with the City of Kingston heritage policies, the 3 heritage conservation districts, the policy on windows and masonry, delegated authority, using the DASH program, and the OHA and standards and guidelines. Like, it's a huge learning curve. And full disclosure, after 4 years, I'm still learning about things. And I think that perhaps this committee is somewhat unique in that it takes a long time to become comfortable with it, and you sort of hate to kind of leave that behind. And what I'm suggesting is hopefully that there's some flexibility in that limit for people who come on board and still have things to offer. That's one comment. My second comment is I just wonder about the terminology around the current splitting the current mandate of Heritage Kingston Advisory Committee into 2 committees. And the current mandate right now seems to encompass things from both of those 2 new committees or 2 split committees. I'm confused that in your report you're referencing a new Heritage Programs Committee and a renamed Heritage Properties Committee. It seems inconsistent with splitting a mandate. And my suggestion is that either it's 2 new committees or 2 split and renamed committees, but not one of each. And I'm wondering too, and this is not a self-serving thing, it's more about the committee as a whole. I'm wondering if we're then excluding volunteers on the Heritage Property Committee who've already served their term limit.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to try to take those in the order you offered them. Thank you. To the conversation of term, again, Council has approved a report that offers direction on the term of an advisory committee as being 4 years. I agree, the onboarding for this committee is high, and one of the discussions around, rescaling the mandates, if you will, was to ensure that the committee was not asked to do more than was reasonable with the knowledge base, and also so that the people who joined the committee kind of really knew what they were going to get their hands on as part of the process. And so I would also point to Exhibit G. We've included in there some language about onboarding, continuing education, using the first meetings of the committees as opportunities to do some deeper dive, kind of real life considerations of what's before the committee as ways of improving that onboarding process. Not specific to this committee, but I will share, we have, for example, Council gets onboarded every 4 years with new members, and that is also a tremendous onboarding process. And so we have had some conversations already about ways that we could improve the onboarding of new members so that it wasn't, 4 years to get up to speed and then potentially, not there. I believe the bylaw, so that is to the term. And then there was a question about maintaining versus splitting, et cetera. So what we don't want to have happen is have a fracture between the continuity of having a heritage committee at the City of Kingston. So we need to continue to have a heritage committee. We need to continue to see that committee be able to process applications. We need to then recruit for a replacement to that committee as we always have done. So the idea was to take the existing committee and continue it under a new name, only to differentiate it from the separation. So the previous committee was called the Municipal Heritage Committee. We now have Heritage Kingston. the Heritage Properties Committee moving forward have all largely dealt with the Ontario Heritage Act. So there is that continuity, which is why the decision was to hold that aspect of the mandate for this function of the committee, because it does represent, we did a lot of analysis. I spent many hours looking at the length of time committee sits, you know, how often applicants and agents were sitting in the room, et cetera. That also included how many times matters that were not Ontario Heritage Act came before the committee, and it was a small percentage, as we all sort of knew intuitively. So I guess the point here is the idea wasn't to strike a new committee, it was to refine the mandate of Heritage Kingston to serve the work that the committee is doing. And so that's why the decision was to allow the committee as it stands dealing with matters of the Ontario Heritage Act to continue and essentially remove the mandate and strike a new committee. You'll note the new committee only meets 4 times a year by requirement, unless required. So again, it's quite a different beast, if you will, than what has remained in the mandate, which very much aligns to the work this committee has done and has been doing over the course of the term. So that was the reason why one is maintained and the other is essentially a net new committee, because it's dealing with, you know, maybe as much as a fifth of the business of the current Heritage Kingston Committee, and that's why. Oh, and sorry, Jane, you also noted regarding the planning and the adjacency. I mean, I think we all are waiting a little bit to see where Bill 23 impacts the planning process, and that will allow us greater clarity to think about when we can request pre-consultation and, you know, how we can speak into those issues when they are not directly under the Ontario Heritage Act.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, yes, Jane?
Yeah, I wasn't totally finished, but I didn't want to overwhelm Jennifer there and have her answer my questions in sequence like she had to. So I guess the other thing is I'm really pleased, I think I've heard this correctly, but I understand that you are going to review the designated authority list in 2023. Is that correct? Is that the plan?
Yes, so the new recommendation we introduced after the feedback that came from several working group members is to put in writing what we had intended all along. So the direction we're requesting from council is to have review of that list, and that would include, as you see in the recommendation, consultation, with what we would hope would then be the Heritage Properties Committee as part of that discussion, but also another opportunity for community input. Because, you know, we did this consultation over many years, and we want to make sure that we're getting new information, getting as many people involved in that important discussion as we can.
Okay, so that's good. I would just like to say that I think when you look at that review, when you consider a whole building project and the cumulative effect of a number of items from delegated authority, suddenly it becomes a major project. And I want to put that out there so that that's in consideration. And I'm back to the old replacement of windows thing, which has been a confusing and contentious issue here for applicants and committee. And because older designations rarely list windows as heritage attributes, I think when that is being looked at, it really needs to be seriously considered whether replacement of windows is a delegated authority and certainly it's never minor.
Thank you so much for that, Jane, because it reminds me to remind committee as well that we are actively reviewing the policy on windows with the Heritage Properties Working Group, and that will then come, you know, forward for recommendation and adoption. And I think it's really important that we get the policy clear, and then we address through this review of the delegated authority about whether or not under that policy it makes sense to have it in there, or do we break certain aspects of it out. So if you're doing repair of existing period windows with a qualified professional, maybe that can be approved, but when you are doing something like replacement, perhaps the committee will feel differently. But I'm very excited that we're working on that policy, and then we'll have the opportunity to do the good work on the delegated authority list and see how the two ought to align given the changes that may be coming with the policy itself. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Other members of committee? If not, going to members of the public, and I'll start within the chamber, recognizing Bruce Downey. And 5 minutes is the time for
questions.
Thank you. Jennifer, thank you very much for that presentation. It's been a long time, a lot of work, a lot of friendly and heated discussions. It was worthwhile for sure. I have 4 points. One has, and they've been brought up briefly here this morning. One has to do with the 4-year term, which I consider very short, and the learning curve of committee members. And I echo comments have been made that consideration should be given to extending that for this committee, particularly in the light of the Properties Committee remaining, and the as a committee means that some members that were part of this review group, their time will be up before all the discussions happen that you're just thinking will happen about how we're going to be discussing this, and coming back to the committee about how to implement items that were part of that review. And I think that losing the membership of members of the present committee during those discussions would be a loss of the consistency of thought in that regard. And therefore, I'm suggesting that both committees are new committees, and therefore the 4-year time limit starts new for both, and you can retain that membership. Second item, planning applications. This committee has always been viewed as and acted as an arm's length review body from staff, from council, and they advise council. So applications coming from the planning department to this committee for comment and seeking that arm's length comment offers an additional perspective, a different perspective to council, and I believe that that advice is valuable in that light as an arm's length group. The delegated authority item, yes, there's a list, and the 2 items that were brought up this morning, windows, just remove it from the list would be the easiest thing to do. Policies do not mean that the best thing is going to happen. There could be other options that are discussed, and windows don't specifically need a building permit. So you can change windows without a building permit, and I think it'd be best if they were removed. Also, the cumulative item came up during our discussions. If you get a number of delegated authority items, if there's like more than 3, then it goes to the committee, or if it's more than that, like that issue did come up during our discussions. And the final item, there has been discussion that had to do with during the review group that questioned the legal interpretation by legal staff here at the city. Jennifer kindly allowed us to have those discussions. I think that it was somewhat outside our mandate, but we were looking at the whole operation of this particular committee, so we felt it important to at least discuss it. And so we did question that some of the viewpoints of the legal department of the city, and when points of view from this committee differ from points of view or interpretations of staff, when it goes to council, it's a staff report, and staff is at council to support and offer rationale for why their particular approach was being accepted. And if there would be a way that committee members who disagree, particularly if it's a large majority of the committee who have disagreed with the staff report, is there a means by which that rationale can also be presented to staff, to council, so that the committee is represented beyond council members, but through staff, the committee is represented, at least their comments are, and council has the benefit of then weighing the opinions that are being offered. That's
4 minutes and 56 seconds. I'm impressed, Bruce. Thank you. Other members of the public? Seeing none, do we have people on Zoom who are waiting?
We do, Mr. Chair. I do see that Miss Bailey has her hand raised if she'd like to go ahead.
Okay.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Shirley.
Thank you. I'm going to keep this well under 5 minutes, Mr. Chair. The committee will have seen the letter which we sent along back in October, and it is in the package today. So in a nutshell, there are just several points that I'd like to make. I want to thank staff and the working group members again for meeting, long meetings during COVID. That was very well done. And not only that, but again, since the report went to council, for staff to take another look at the material, and which enabled others to take a close look at the material. That again, it has been very much appreciated. The foundation, at our board meeting this week, we wanted to really emphasize that we're very pleased to see that dividing this committee into 2 groups has been really important. We have heard from many contractors across the city who have felt that it's such a, it takes a lot of time to take applications to the committee. So this is a very good thing. We are also very pleased that this new Part 4 process, we think, will be an excellent avenue for many applications where there is consensus. And, that's, if we can shorten those approval times, I think that's a very good thing as well. I'm very pleased to hear from Jennifer, at least my interpretation of what Jennifer said is that we really are looking at minor applications in terms of the delegation bylaw, and perhaps what Bruce Downey has suggested, that the windows simply be deleted from that list. That's an option. But I do think that the process that has been suggested by Jennifer, that the Windows policy will be updated, and then after that, the delegation bylaw will be updated. I think that's a very good procedure to adopt. I just, and I heard Jennifer's comments about the planning applications, and of course, being a former planner, I think it's really important that this committee should look at development applications whenever possible. I know it's just one piece of the puzzle when you're looking at planning application, but it's a very important piece of the puzzle. I just wonder, Jennifer, though, if you could take a couple of minutes to explain a little more fully, if you can, how you think the roundtable is going to work. Who will sit on it? Will there be any issues in terms of committee members, finding quorum perhaps on the roundtable? Or will there be situations where the public can sit in on those sessions? If you could just take a couple of minutes to expand on that, that would be much appreciated. But again, in summary, I just want to say thank you again, both the city staff and the working group working group members, Dawn, Taylor, Helen Finley, and Bruce Downey for a job very well done. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I just want to check with the clerks to make sure that I'm correct on this. Staff are afforded equal time to the public when responding to comments from the public. I just don't want to run over time.
Absolutely. I'm just going to verify that we don't have any further public speakers before turning it over to staff. So I'm just going to check if there's anyone else who's joining us on Zoom who'd like to speak to the current business item. If you could please raise your hand in Zoom so that we may call on you. And I don't see any hands, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So we assume that all have now spoken. Jennifer.
Thank you, and through you, and apologies for jumping in there. So I'm going to start just with some of the comments that Bruce raised. Some of them, I think, as Bruce noted, we'd already discussed, thanks to some of the questions from committee members. So yes, the 4-year term has been approved by council, and so I think I've spoken to that. Additionally, the reason for the continuity of the existing committee, given that the mandate largely serves the Ontario Heritage Act as the existing committee structure serves the Ontario Heritage Act, seems appropriate to have that continuity for the purposes of continuing to process heritage considerations under the current structure as well as in the new incoming structure. The language in the procedural bylaw, just on the arm's length aspect of the Heritage acting as a review body on planning matters, and again, the elephant of Bill 23, but also the reality of how we have handled this clause within the procedural bylaw when we have had opportunity to do pre-consultation with the committee when a heritage permit has not been brought forward. We have requested that from planning processes. We cannot mandate it, however, because it is not required under the Act, and that, again, where we have Bill 23 potentially further changing what can be asked of applicants for large developments. And as the chair alluded to earlier, we as staff are preparing comments into the Bill 23 specific to heritage in the open consultation period. Unfortunately, we did not have those ready for committee to review prior to our submission of them, but we will share them as correspondence with the committee when they are submitted. I also just wanted to add there that staff are bringing a report to council on December 6th, which is a comprehensive review of the changes proposed through Bill 23, so that council is aware of what that will be looking like. We will then have to deal with what they actually do and the regulations that will follow. The conversation about removing windows from the delegated authority list, I think, is not something the working group came to any sense of agreement on. The idea was to maintain the list as it is with some minor changes. The minor changes were we removed like 10% of the soffits and the like because committee was receiving reports where we're like 15% of the soffits are being replaced. And so, you know, we did have some minor changes there, nothing impacting in any strong way. But maintaining the windows in there while we work on the policy, I actually think is quite important. And I think it's important because the windows policy, many times when we see people coming in, it's not for complete repair replacement. It's for things that are quite minor that conform with the existing policy. And what I would hate to see is us, you know, discouraging property owners from taking care of incredibly important windows because the process becomes longer and they do the work anyway. And then staff spend time communicating with applicants about why didn't you come in for a heritage permit? We spend a lot of time right now on kind of non-compliance, and I'm wary of setting up a system where anyone is made to feel that maintenance of their windows under the windows policy needs to be done through non-compliance because they don't want to take 45 days for that to be considered at the committee. The other item of many DA items coming in at once and the sum being greater than the parts, we did discuss that at the working group, and one of the kind of paradoxes we found ourselves in is that if each one would have been approved as a separate DA, they could come in for 12 separate DAs, and each would be approved. So we would have to look at whether or not we put a time constraint on the number that you had within a specific set of construction activity. This was less concerning when there was a fee applied to heritage permits. People wanted to put them all together. But I think what we would have would be confused applicants who would say this change and this change are approved or could be approved, but because I'm doing 3 at once. We did, though, very much discuss, Bruce and Dawn and Helen and myself and Andrea and Ann Dalton, it just goes on. We discussed this at length about what do we do when multiple things are happening and there is a sense that this is more than the individual parts. And we talked about having the authority for the director to decline the permit. And right now we're doing a lot of good work, I think, with committee members on doing better to consult and discuss the delegated authorities that are sort of hitting that edge where staff are a little uncomfortable that the sum is greater than the parts. So I do think it's a very important part of this discussion as we move forward. I don't see the benefit of removing the windows policy wholesale right now when it's under review, hopefully going to be adopted as reviewed, and then will set us up to do what I think we can do quite successfully, which is amend that DA. And then finally, just to Bruce's points, disagreement with the committee and staff that then goes up to council. I would just add here that when permits or applications under Part 4 are altered at committee, the altered recommendation as approved by committee goes to council. Staff do not have by right an opportunity to address council and say this was changed from what staff recommended. And the councillors can reference, of course, the materials that came forward at committee, or the councillors who attend committee or otherwise can ask if they note a change between those processes. If it is a non-supported Part 5, for example, where the amendment is not made, but the committee says we don't support this, that usually does result in conversation at council, because council will say, you know, this wasn't supported by committee, and then usually the council member who was on the committee speaks to it, and staff have an opportunity to reflect on what the concerns raised were. I would just say staff reflect what the committee shares with us. This is not a cloak and dagger experience. It is all part of the public record. We would never misrepresent the views of committee to council because they are well documented, and we are largely not in that mindset generally. So we are a team. We're trying to represent those views as appropriate. I just wanted to share that. And then finally, to the conversation of Shirley about roundtable participation. Yeah, committee members would be welcome at the roundtable, as well as members of the public. These would be scheduled meetings. We're expecting them to be kind of routine, specific day of the week in the HRC. Any interested member of the public, the applicant themselves, agents could attend, members of committee could attend as well. There is a risk that we could form quorum. We will track that very carefully. I have worked with the city now for almost 7 years in matters of heritage. I have seen this committee form quorum outside of a committee meeting once, and it was at a very exciting site visit. And so I acknowledge the risk, but I do think it is one we can manage and, you know, make sure that we don't tip into having quorum at those roundtable meetings. And if we do, we'll have to come up with an approach there that we can work with, which will ensure that people can participate as they would like to, and we're not doing anything procedurally inaccurate. So thank you for the additional time.
Thank you. Other staff members? Seeing none, then you have a recommendation in the package. It has 7 parts to it that Heritage Kingston recommends to council, and I'm not going to read all 7 parts. Looking for a mover. Don Taylor, and a seconder. And Councillor Oosterhoff. Thank you, the 2 of you. Comments?
Mr. Chair, I had been considering a number of amendments, and some of those have been perhaps overtaken by previous discussions. I wonder if I could have a recess of 5 minutes to talk to my seconder as to what we should try to bring forward. Is that all right?
What does the committee wish for a 5-minute recess? Can you wave your hands if that's okay? Nod your heads. Okay, so it is 10:35. We'll be back at 10:40. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 10:40. You've had your 5 minutes recess. We just seem to have lost Don. Oh, he's around the corner. Okay. Paul is here, Councillor Oosterhoff, and Jalinka, I see. And we'll just wait a moment for Paul to get to the microphone.
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question. Mr. Chair?
Yeah. While we're waiting for Don, is any other committee members wishing to comment?
Councillor Oosterhoff has his hand.
Councillor Oosterhoff, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I'm just a bit confused with Don's question there. Do we not, so you put the motion up, I seconded it, and why do, it's now open to amendments, right? But the seconder doesn't have to be aware of the amendments to come. It just comes to the committee for consideration, any amendments. Is that correct?
It is open for amendments, and we have been told we are able to amend the report. And one of our members had sent in possible amendments ahead of time, and in light of the conversation that has taken place this morning, he has now been looking at them to see whether he wants to go ahead. So if I can give the floor over to Don, he will then let us know whether he's going ahead with amendments or if the recommendation will stay as printed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Don.
Yes, well, as mentioned, I had been considering some amendments, and to some extent, they've been overtaken by discussion and Bill 23 and so on. So given what's come before, I don't think I'm going to propose any amendments. It doesn't mean that I'm 100% satisfied with the report, and I'll make some comments on that in a moment. So I guess that deals with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the amendments, which some of you may have seen, are no longer being offered. Looking for comments, we have a mover and a seconder, and I've forgotten who the mover and seconder were. Sorry?
I just had a couple questions about, like, is it okay to still ask questions? That's cool? Yeah. Okay, I had a couple of questions about the 4-year term as well. Just, I know we've had problems keeping members. We've seen a lot, like in my 4-year term, we've seen a lot of people come and go. And I know it's a very time consuming. And again, like we were just discussing how it's hard to even feel comfortable to make recommendations until you've been here really like a while, a couple years, where you feel like your opinion, you finally understand sort of the various literature that can sort of back up what you say and stuff like that. So I was wondering, yeah, is it just like a set 4, then none of us can come back on again? Or if you guys don't have enough people applying now that we're losing like a large chunk of the committee, like how that works, honestly.
Thank you, and through you, I can certainly start, and if the committee chair has anything to add from a more kind of committee procedural focus, I would certainly welcome that as well. My understanding is that the 4-year term requires a 1-year window of, like, there's a hiatus period, if you will, and then I believe you can apply again, but I would want the committee clerk to confirm that. I'm not as familiar with that aspect of the procedural processes of the City of Kingston. And I think the other part, you're right, it takes a long time to orient people to the committee, and that's why we do include in Exhibit G really specific information, or not specific information, but a direction to staff to look at how we orient committee. And with a reduction of mandate, we are hoping, and the working group was hoping, that we would be able to get people up to speed moving forward. So I wish I had more that was available in that regard. But that is my understanding, and I don't know, Madam Clerk, if you had anything additional regarding the opportunity for reapplication.
Mr. Chair, through you, the only thing that I would add there is that council also sees having that knowledge on the committee to be a very important thing as well. And so there is expected to be that grace period in which they would be considering having some of the inaugural or the previous members come back on. Again, it depends on the amount of individuals who come forward, who put their name through. We would never turn down an application, and that's something that can be considered as we move forward. But Director Campbell is correct that once the 4-year term is complete, the typical process is for there to be 1-year hiatus where you could go and be a part of any other committee that you wish, but you would have to take a break from the committee that you had sat on for those 4 years, and then you could come back and reapply.
Good, thank you for that, and I have no further information on that, so it's, I think in 4 years' time, we may be re-looking at that one. Other questions? Don?
Well, I'll make some comments. First of all, just to repeat that, this report has recommendations that should improve procedures and interaction with the applicants and so on considerably. And, one of the problems that committee members had in the past was that they didn't really have the opportunity to talk to applicants until they're around this table. And very often, if they at a site visit or pre-consultation, they could make suggestions and so on. So with the roundtable, I hope that problem will be improved, and so I welcome that. The other thing I want to say is that, I've stated my concerns, and they are continuing concerns. Jennifer has given her position on the delegated authority and the legal advice from the city. I'd like to repeat, the committee has never heard a legal opinion from staff as to why they are not following ministry legal advice. And I think it's extremely unfortunate. I think it's embarrassing that this committee is functioning in this way. And I certainly hope that that changes in the future. So that's one point. The other point I think Bruce raised to some extent is the problem that we are increasingly having, it seems, about discussions at council when there are divergences of opinion. Of course, that's fair enough. In the old days, the committee, well, let me just read something that I had prepared here. The procedural bylaw for heritage states, and I'm more or less quoting, staff will prepare a report summarizing comments, background information, and recommendations for consideration by Heritage Kingston. Heritage Kingston shall review the merits of the application and provide a recommendation to council. So that sounds clear, but that's not really what happens in practice. The practice is that the staff report goes to Heritage Kingston, goes to council with their analysis, their recommendations. Of course, the Heritage Kingston recommendation, which perhaps may be amended, it's on the agenda as well. But council don't really have, unless they've come to this committee or have read the minutes of the discussion, they don't really know why we've amended those recommendations. So it's really not a reasonable situation. The situation is that council are supposed to consult the committee, and they can, but it's much easier for them to listen to staff. And so I think that's an unfortunate situation. And I'm hoping that with the round table, it's more likely that staff and committee members will come to a common understanding and go forward with a similar recommendation. But it's really not, I think it's really unfortunate where the committee recommendations are really at a disadvantage. And given that we are supposed to be making the recommendations to council, that it's not easy for council to make decisions. So I'll stop there. I think I would like to see maybe it's not going to happen. The other major point is delegated authority. As I mentioned, I certainly have no confidence in the situation. That doesn't, what I've heard doesn't align with what we've heard from the ministry. I mean, I and other members of the community have talked to members of the ministry, people who prepared the Ontario Heritage Act. We've asked about what's really going on with the delegated authority, and they have said it is absolutely clear that staff don't have to go to council, but they have to consult the committee. And I even asked, has this been tested in any sort of court or hearing or tribunal? And the answer was, no, it hasn't. It's so obvious that it would never be. So to me, it's obvious. It's obviously not obvious to everybody, but to me, that remains a real problem with this committee. Because when we have, as we had with 168 Ontario, that old former Scotiabank and Victorian Grey building, very important limestone building, $1 million renovations. The committee never heard about it. Council never heard about. That's what the Ontario Heritage Act was meant to prevent. It was meant to prevent major alterations without the community knowing about it. So I'm absolutely not satisfied with our present use of delegated authority. So I put those remarks on the record, and I hope, I say I'm disappointed that the working group hasn't been able to resolve or come forward with recommendation on that, but there's still work to be done. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Other members wishing to speak to the motion on the floor? I see none. I see no hands on Zoom. So the motion then is as printed in your agenda that Heritage Kingdom recommends to council. There are 7 recommendations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, and a little one, 7. People on Zoom are going to vote using their hands, please. So those in favor, if you raise your hand. Those opposed, if you can raise your hand. That carries 7-0. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to add again my extra thank you to staff for putting in that last recommendation, thanking the working group. It's a huge job you've done, and at least we can now work from where we are and see what comes from this. Okay, cultural heritage, Melanie.
Elizabeth, can you sign in? That's okay. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who have not met, I'm Melanie Banks. I'm the Supervisor of Museum Operations and Collections with Heritage Services. I'm here to speak about the civic collections acquisitions and the recommendations we're making in that report. Very briefly, before I get to the recommendations, I'm just going to go over the civic collections policy. The mandate of the policy is to promote public understanding of the history and culture of the City of Kingston municipal government, and more generally, the tangible and intangible heritage of the Kingston community's culture, standards, and values. There are four categories of the collection. The first category is the primary collection. It consists of accessioned and cataloged objects that are of the highest level of historic value. They have a direct connection to a museum, collection, or a site. An example of this would be the mayoral portraits that you see throughout City Hall. The next category is the secondary collection. It consists of accessioned and cataloged objects that have historic value but may not relate directly to a museum, site, or collection. An example of this would be at the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum, the wood planes that are there. The last two categories do not have accessioned objects and are deemed consumable assets. The first is a working collection reserved for objects used exclusively for educational and interpretive purposes. The last category is general heritage assets. This is reserved for objects which support operations at a site, such as some of the furniture you see around City Hall. In the report, there are two collections processes that are covered. We're recommending 7 acquisitions to the primary collection and 3 acquisitions to the secondary collection. So the first object that we're recommending to the collection is a collection of 1908 fire maps and surveys of Kingston, Portsmouth, and Berryfield with 1915 additions. We're recommending this to the primary collection. These maps help tell the story of the 1908 fire and the process the city took to rebuild. These fire and survey documents will be instrumental in researching the development of the City of Kingston. The next 2 objects we're recommending in the collection are 2 printing plates. The first depicts an image of City Hall from 1901, and the second, dating to 1964, depicts the municipal government sitting in Memorial Hall. We are recommending these to the primary collection. These objects promote public understanding of the history and culture of the City of Kingston municipal government. They will help tell the history and help interpret the development of City Hall. The next object we're recommending to the collection is a charred piece of wood. This was found in the Councilor's Lounge during the City Hall fire suppression system upgrades. It's likely dating to the 1908 fire in the City Hall Dome. We're recommending this to the primary collection. Interpretation of the history of Kingston City Hall is a key undertaking within the interpretive mandate of City Hall as a National Historic Site. This charred piece of wood helps to interpret the story of the 1908 fire and the process to rebuild the dome. Within the dome remain signs of the charring from the 1908 fire, and this is a key piece in interpreting that history. The next object we're recommending to the collection is a metal pulley dating to the late 1800s. It was found in the ceiling above the lobby entrance by contractors. We're recommending this to the primary collection. Once again, interpretation of the history of Kingston City Hall is a key undertaking within the interpretive mandate of the City Hall as the National Historic Site. This cast iron pulley dating to the 1800s was found in a piece of wood in the ceiling above the main entrance lobby. Originally at the center of the Ontario Street entrance to City Hall was a 2-story limestone archway, which opened at street level to a gravel path leading from Ontario Street to Market Shambles Wing. This piece helps tell the story of the changing faces of City Hall. The next 2 objects we're recommending in the collection are 2 fragments of wallpaper, which was found in City Hall in the live-in caretaker's apartment, also during contractor work. We are recommending these pieces to the primary collection. These fragments help to interpret the development of City Hall over the years. These fragments were found in the rooms which previously housed the caretaker's residence at City Hall in what is now legal services. The next 2 objects we're recommending in the collection are 2 Pittsburgh bicentennial souvenirs. The first is a souvenir spoon, and the second is a souvenir plate. We are recommending both of these objects to the secondary collection. These objects help promote public understanding of the history and culture of the City of Kingston municipal government. These objects detail the Township of Pittsburgh crest and help tell the story of the development of the City of Kingston and the amalgamation of Pittsburgh. The last object we're recommending in the collection is a Kingston Tercentenary souvenir dating to 1973. We are recommending this to the secondary collection. This object helps promote the understanding of the history and culture of the City of Kingston and was potentially a gift from the Mayor's office to help celebrate Kingston's tercentenary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Melanie. Questions, comments, members of the committee, members at home? Members of the public? Oh, Paul, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Thank you for the report, Melanie. It's just some very interesting items there. My question actually concerns the categories. I understand primary and secondary and the need for accessioning, and if you've accessioned, then you have to de-accession if you don't wish it. I also understand the reason why the working collection and the general heritage assets are not accessioned, so therefore they don't have to be de-accessioned, but they often are disposed of. And I'm curious to know, what is the procedure, as opposed to process, or maybe process and procedure, of disposing of such items? For example, are they just disposed, or do you make some attempt prior to contact other institutions or repositories, et cetera, to see if they might be interested in those items?
We do. So for the process for deaccessioning for primary and secondary would come through this committee and then on to council. And so it would be in a report. And then for the working and general heritage assets, because they are deemed consumable assets, they wouldn't come through this, but there would be information on it. But we do tend to offer objects to other museums, try to find them a new home before disposing of them.
Okay, and it's a supplementary question. Have you been successful in that regard over time?
In what regard, sorry?
In regard to the items, the general and the working collection, in approaching other institutions to see if they would be interested?
I've been with the city for about a year. I've not done that yet with the city, but with other previous positions, yes, I have had a chance to rehome objects that didn't fit into the collection or the mandate of the museum, and then rehome them to the proper institution.
Good, okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for that, explaining that so well. I really applaud the variety of these collectible items, especially the charred piece of wood. I know as a mother, that one item would bring the whole history of the fire, multiple fires in Kingston, bring it to life. And I think that's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? And seeing none, then you have a motion, recommendation that the 7 items be accepted for the primary collection and the 3 for the secondary collection. Looking for a mover. And I see Jennifer, thank you. And the seconder, Paul Banfield. Further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor of the motion as printed? And those opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Oh, over there, Melanie, thank you. Okay, 955 Sydenham Road. Ryan, I believe this is you.
It is me, Mr. Chair. So given the hour and the fact that we have 10 heritage permits to present to you today, Mr. Chair, my counterpart and I will try to be as brief as possible with our presentations and leave time for committee questions. So I'll get right at it. This application is 965 Sydenham Road. It's on the west side of Sydenham Road, across from the Cataraqui Cemetery, in the former village of Cataraqui. The property was formerly known as the Cataraqui United Church and Cemetery. It is now the home of St. Gregory of Nyssa Eastern Orthodox Church and Heritage Cemetery at Cataraqui, designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act in 2018. Some of the attributes include the graveyard, the markers and monuments thereon, the limestone wall along Sydenham Road, and its visibility and legibility from the road. So what's before the committee today is an application for a new sign It is a two-sided V-shaped sign. It states United Empire Loyalist Burial Ground. The sign is to be located approximately 38 meters south of the church, about 4 meters in from the retaining wall, and stand at a total height of 1.5 meters. Each face measures about 80 centimeters by 64 centimeters, and it's to be constructed of metal. So in terms of our review, the property is a good example of a Gothic revival style church set in a graveyard. Its location on the crest of a hill, distinctive architecture, and longtime use as a religious meeting place makes the property a landmark in the area and an important heritage resource. Staff have no concerns with the proposed location, scale, style, materiality, and color of the sign. The new sign will be compatible with the historic cemetery and will not interfere with the attributes of the property. Providing the public with further information on the history and significance of a cemetery will broaden one's understanding of the place and the resource, and is a welcome addition to the heritage value of the site. In terms of our circulation, building notes that this is exempt from the current sign bylaw, as it's not an advertisement but more of a space marking identity signage. And they actually requested it be backed up from the retaining wall, which is why it's now at 4 meters. We'll need some permits from engineering, temporary access and encroachment. We also circulated this to committee. The 3 responding members noted the proposed initial height, which was 2 meters, was perhaps a bit tall, so the applicants have agreed to drop it down to 1.5 meters as a result of those comments. And staff are supportive of this application, as I mentioned, and this is the motion before committee with a series of recommendations. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan. So committee, you have a motion there with 5 conditions. Any questions to Ryan, first of all? And seeing none, looking for a mover for the motion as printed. Oh, Jane and Jennifer at the same time. Thank you very much. Discussion. Last chance. Seeing none then, the motion as printed, 1 motion, 5 recommendations. Those in favor, if you can raise your hands, please. And I see all hands raised on Zoom and here, so that motion carries. Thank you very much, Ryan. We move on to Phil. Already there, 123 Sydenham Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everybody. Similar to Ryan, I'm going to get right into it here. So 123 Sydenham Street, designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. This application is mostly dealing with the northwest corner roof and has to do with alterations on said roof. 123 Sydenham Street is on the northwesterly most entrance to Hotel Dieu, which is located on the east side of Sydenham Street in between Brock and Johnson Street. The westerly entrance of this 5-story stone building has a central 3-bay section with large ashlar, my apologies, plasters topped by block capitals, as well as a large frame porch in a classical style and a central frame octagonal cupola. The current photos show the view from the street, which you generally see very little roof action from there. These photos here are provided by the applicant, show the current condition of the roof system and other associated features that are being discussed today. As you can see, a lot of it is in pretty poor shape. So the property is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act through Bylaw 4865. And if you'd like to see the entire entry, please see in the report for the full piece there. So most of these alterations are meant to address long-standing roof issues ranging from leaks to missing/deteriorated cladding material, which will increase the longevity of the roofing system. The roof's integrity and replacement, which is mostly like for like, was dealt with in an emergency approval earlier this year, P18-102-2022. The extensive submission material that was provided by the applicant reveals a detailed assessment has been completed of the existing main building roof, frame, porch, and cupola. My apologies. However, many smaller scale changes are related but not 100% linked to the main building roof, which is why we are discussing the alterations here today. So the above slide shows select photos of this detailed submission, which covers various roofing features that are proposed to be slightly changed for longevity purposes, restored or replaced like for like. The entire list of changes can be found on the first page of Exhibit C in the associated report. This proposal speaks to recladding the exterior of the cupola, stabilize the existing deteriorating elements, reapply coats of paint, repairing decayed wood, and the wooden porch will also have repainting/deteriorated wood elements restored as necessary, while also enhancing its weather protection by adding a new roofing system not visible from the street. All of these works will be done like for like. With regard to other alterations of the main building, roof limited modifications include new venting systems, roof drains, eaves troughs, downspouts, flashing, new structural elements like railings, doors, or AC platforms, and potentially extending plumbing vents by a few inches as necessary, but all changes will be made as close as possible to maintain the existing form. These features are expected to be in the same location or similar location to the existing, and these changes will ensure the property can better withstand moisture, condensation, and water penetration, while also increasing the ease of future maintenance activities. These alterations will not be visible from the ground, just like they exist today. Finally, masonry units are to be repointed, and while some masonry unit replacements may be necessary, it is not expected at this time. If replacement is pursued, the applicant must follow the city's masonry policy, and replacement masonry units shall be sourced to match as close as possible in color, size, and profile as the existing. Overall, this proposal will better preserve the hospital for the long term, while allowing an opportunity to restore the most visible and unique features that link today's hospital to its church-centric history. Just to note here, on the slide here, I did highlight November 1st, but this was because this was before the committee did not meet quorum. So the appeal was meant to appear at the November 1st council meeting, but was unavailable due to the meeting. The actual finalized recommendation does not have that wording in it. If you can confirm that as well in the agenda. And this is part 2 of our recommendation. If there are any further questions, I'd be more than willing to answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. Questions? Got to Phil? Seeing none, looking for a mover and a... Sorry?
There are applicants here.
Oh, applicants here, sorry. Applicants wish to speak?
If there's anyone joining us on Zoom from the applicants team who wishes to speak, if they could please raise their hand in Zoom just so that we can know.
Nope. Okay, again, questions from members of the committee? And seeing none, look for a mover and a seconder. I see Don, I see Jennifer, thank you very much. It is a statement with 5 paragraphs and then 8 conditions added on. Questions? Nothing from home. Okay, it stands there. We will vote on that as printed. As I say, the 5 statements you have there, and then the 8 conditions moved by Don, seconded by Jennifer. Those in favor, if you could raise your hands, please. And that is all 7, so there is nobody voting against. Thank you very much, Phil. And boy, that's an interesting one to watch through. You stay with us for 12 Wellington Street. Now, are we dealing with this as a Part 4 or a Part 5?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's an alteration under Section 42, so it's a Part 5.
Part 5, okay, so we're now into Part 5. Thank you.
Okay. 42 Wellington Street is designated under Part 4 and 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. This is an alteration proposal that seeks to focus solely on the new utilities and utility openings. I do want to note that another alteration proposal will be before committee later this morning, which will deal with the other extensive alterations to the property. 12 Wellington Street is located on a nearly triangular parcel between Lower Union, West, and Wellington Streets and abuts the eastern side of City Park. This property contains a 2.5-story, 3-bay brick house which sits on a high stone foundation with ashlar base and string courses along with a prominent southeast-facing front porch. The above elevation classifications correspond to the applicant's plan layout, which will be shown in approximately 2 slides. So 12 Wellington Street is designated under Part 4 and 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as noted earlier. If you'd like to look at the entire entry, it can be found in the report as for both Part 4 and 5s. So the green circles on the plan images show the utilities and utility openings that are being altered or added to support this project. All other noted alterations will be discussed in a forthcoming application. The applicant has agreed to covering the gas and electrical meters visible along the street on the north elevation in a similar fashion to the AC units, which are also being proposed on the southern elevation. The other penetrations with its associated coverings will be painted to match the background, which should minimize their visual impact. This color treatment applies to all venting minus the fireplace terminations, which will require bare aluminum. Staff will review these color/finish choices to minimize visual disruptions. Many of these utilities are strategically placed to minimize their impacts. The dryer vent covering along the freeze board will project 0.08 meters and could technically compete with the exaggerated cornice, which is a heritage attribute. The color choice will helpfully mitigate this impact, and according to the applicant, there is no easily accessible alternative that would project less than this. Despite this, the impacts will likely be quite minimal. Finally, these utilities and their penetration/projections are necessary to support this multi-residential use and were strategically located to avoid unnecessary alterations to the most prominent Wellington Street facade. Similar to the last decision before you, their November 1st meeting obviously was not able to go before that. Obviously, this will be reviewed at the December 6th council meeting if supported or not supported.
Can you confirm that your dash comments were correctly recorded? Any concerns there? Okay, thank you. And members of the public, especially those on Zoom wishing to make comments on this? I see nobody in the chamber, nobody on Zoom. Okay, thank you. Committee members, questions? And seeing none here or there. Final comments? So we're looking for a mover and a seconder then. You have 3 paragraphs of changes and 6 conditions as printed in your agenda. A mover? Oh, Jennifer and Jane, thank you very much. Further discussion? And seeing none, I'll ask you to raise your hand in vote. Those in favor of the motion as printed? Those opposed? We have all in favor, so that is declared as carried. Thank you very much. 42 Lower Union. We're doing that one. I have Aidan's name, but I'll let you do it then. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The application for 42 Lower Union Street is a proposal for a front gable dormer like those that currently exist at the adjacent 40 Lower Union Street. 42 Lower Union Street is located on the south side of Lower Union Street and is mid-block between Ontario Street and King Street East. The subject property is one of a series of 3 similar row houses along Lower Union Street that stand 2.5 stories tall with a brick facade and a limestone foundation. This entire entry is available in the corresponding report, but I did want to note that it was designated as part of the Old Sydenham Heritage Conservation District Plan in 2015. The existing roof, minus its firewalls and chimney, is not a heritage attribute itself, but its form is consistent with the other two row houses and general roofing pitch in the district. The new dormer will maintain the existing roof line and general roof structure, as well as better blend with 40 Lower Union Street while increasing resident usability. The proposed dormer seeks to emulate the wood panel cladding on 40 Lower Union Street, and the proposed window will be an aluminum-clad window with external Muntin bars as recommended by the plan. Despite this window being installed in a character-defining facade, the positioning of the dormer directly above the easterly window should result in better symmetry when considering the dormer placement at 40 Lower Union Street and complement the existing massing of this row house series. Overall, this new dormer addition should maintain the heritage value of the building while also adding to one of the many delights of the district, which namely is, quote, a variety of dormers that punctuate the skyline. Thank you. Oh, and these are the recommendations before you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, members, your dash comments are okay? Good. Members of the public wishing to make comments on this? Anybody on Zoom? No? Thank you. Committee members, questions, comments? Moving right along. Final comments, which, since you haven't had any first comments, you really can't have final comments, but that's what it says. Mover and seconder, as printed, you have 3 paragraphs and then 7 conditions on this one. Looking for a mover, I see Don and I see Jane. Does anybody wish to speak further on this? See nobody at home, see nobody here, so it is as printed. The alterations, 42 Lower Union, 3 of them, and then the 7 conditions. Ask you to raise your hands for those in favor. And for those opposed, thank you, Councillor Oosterhoff. That carries by 7 with no objections. Staying with 42, but moving on to 42 Wellington. Ryan, this I believe is you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 42 Wellington Street, on the southwest intersection of Wellington and Gore Street. The property includes a 1.5-story frame dwelling built by 1829 with a later single-story rear addition. The designation bylaw notes that the rear addition was probably there by the early 1850s. The property is designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act and noted as significant to the district. So what's before you today is a Section 42 application requesting approval to construct 2 new additions and to make a number of exterior alterations to the existing 1.5-story dwelling. The proposed interventions include a single-story vestibule addition on the Wellington Street elevation, which you can see in the bottom lower left of your screen. A new partially glazed door and sash window will be part of that addition. The applicants are also proposing to install a 1/1 sash window on the original house. Should evidence be found that one existed at that location, you can see that here at the top right. And to replace an existing door and window on the rear addition with a central patio door with simulated divided lights, and that's this one here. The rear addition, which you can kind of see back here, is a single-story addition, and the applicants wish to add a second story to the northwest portion of the rear addition, so not the entire rear addition. You can see that in the section at the bottom right. The addition is just over that portion of the back. The addition will be lower in height than the main dwelling. The southeast wall is to be clad in wood siding, while the other walls are, given their close proximity to the lot lines, are required to be a non-combustible material, so there'll be a fiber cement board in a similar shiplap pattern as its wooden counterparts, and the roofing is to be a dark asphalt shingle. detailed plans are included in your agenda package and attached to our report. So in terms of our review, while the subject property has a Wellington Street address, the primary and most visible facade of the original 1820s building faces Gore Street. You can see that in the image on your screen. The building is located at the southwest corner of the property with no setbacks from the west, very little, from the west and south lot lines or from Gore Street. Further, while the property is technically a corner lot, the portion of the site that fronts the intersection of Gore and Wellington Streets is private open space with various mature trees and vegetation essentially acting as the backyard for the property. The district plan provides various high-level guidelines related to additions on heritage buildings. Namely, that additions should be located away from the main street facade at the rear of the building. If located on the side of the building, they should be clearly set back from the face of the heritage structures to maintain the prominence of the heritage structure, and should avoid causing irreversible damage and changes to the original building. The new single-story vestibule will be added to the side of the original dwelling with a setback of 2.5 meters from the front or Gore Street wall of the main building, thus conserving and highlighting the prominence of the heritage building on the street. The existing doorway opening to the main house will remain unaltered within the new vestibule, thus allowing the vestibule to be removed in the future with minimal lasting impacts to the heritage structure. Similarly, the second-story rear addition will be set back over 3.5 meters from the Wellington Street facade of the existing rear addition, thereby retaining the original roof profile and locating the addition as far away from the public realm as possible. I also noted that the district plan encourages the height of the new additions should be no more than the main building. The applicants have prepared their plans to clearly indicate that both the side addition at 3.3 meters and the rear addition at 5.6 meters will be lower than the main dwelling at 5.7 meters. Similar to policies of the district plan, Standard 11 of Parks Canada Standards and Guidelines directs that new construction is to be physically and visibly compatible with, subordinate to, and distinguishable from the heritage place. The new addition will be designed to be compatible in terms of its materiality, profile, and window design, yet subordinate to the attached heritage building in terms of their height, massing, and location. So as noted in our report, the location of the building on the lot changes how one would utilize the space. Where private amenity space would typically be found behind the main dwelling, in a backyard, the property's only open space is between the building and the streets. The new vestibule addition will help frame that private space, and the new patio doors will further this message, thus clearly separating the subordinate rear addition and outdoor space from the prominent historic building facing Gore Street. So in summary, the proposal conforms with the intent, goals, and policies of the Old Sydenham Plan, as well as the objectives of the official plan and the provincial and federal directives. In terms of our comments, we did receive a number of technical flags and requirements from the technical agencies that are noted in their responses and were included as conditions of approval. This includes requirements for building permits, Heritage Act approvals, access permits, tree permits, identification of hazardous materials, and locates, etc. Heritage Committee provided comments, and they were largely in support of this application. Mr. Chair, the recommendation is before you. This is the first slide of the recommendation, as there are a number of conditions, and this is the second slide with the rest of the conditions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Members, have your dash comments been correctly transcribed? Seeing no complaints. Members of the public wishing to make comments, firstly in council chamber or on Zoom, if anybody can raise their hand from the public. And seeing nobody there. Committee members, questions? Okay. So, needing a motion and a seconder from the committee for one recommendation and 11 conditions. See done, and I see Paul Banfield. Thank you very much. Further comments Don?
Well, this is really just a comment. This house is a very modest, one of the most modest houses in the district. And given all kinds of pressures that exist nowadays, I think it's really encouraging that people are taking the initiative to make it more livable and give it a longer lifetime, I think, because, I think with these modest houses, there's a danger sometimes that they will simply disappear. But so this is really very commendable. Thank you.
I just want to reiterate my comment on Dash as well. I really want to commend the applicant on the research and respect for this simple but significant to the district heritage property. So thank you.
There you go, Rebecca's unmuted.
Rebecca, do you wish to speak?
Yeah, is that okay? I'm one of the two owners of the property.
She's just asking if it's okay.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, oh, I just wanted to thank the committee members for their feedback. And my husband and I are very excited to be part of the neighborhood and to have the home. And we're really looking forward to keeping it as is as much as possible within the guidelines of the heritage planning and everything. And we're excited to see what it will become and have great confidence in our team.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for being present today. So unless there are other questions, we have a motion. We have one recommendation. One recommendation with 11 conditions, moved by Don, seconded by Paul Bamfield. Those in favor, if you can raise your hands. 5, 6, 7. I see all hands raised. Thank you very much. So that is carried. Thank you, Ryan, for that one. And I guess you stay there for 216 Ontario.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure everyone is quite familiar with this address. This is, of course, the building we are sitting in, Kingston City Hall, National Historic Site of Canada, designated both parts 4 and 5, part of the Market Square Heritage District. And of interest in this particular application is that the Part 4 designation includes a number of interior features. This room, for example, is a heritage attribute of this building, as you can imagine. And when Part 4s and 5s are together, if we're talking exterior alterations, then the district plan governs the process. So that's a Part 5 process. In the case of interior attributes, because district plans or heritage districts in general don't include interior features, we are reliant on the Part 4 process. So this application today is governed under Section 33, which is Part 4, as we are talking about interior alterations. Our facilities team are looking to improve the public safety and usability of the 2 main staircases coming into City Hall, the interior staircases. An application under Section 33 is being submitted to request approval to install brass-colored metal handrails on the interior side of the staircases from the main floor to the second floor of the building. The new brass-colored handrails are to be installed to the underside of the main handrails and to selected balusters. No changes to the marble treads or the top of wooden handrails are proposed. And again, detailed plans are in your agenda package, but I've included a couple on the screen here. The main entrance and lobby of Kingston City Hall that one sees today is the product of substantial renovations to the building in 1973, which saw the infill of the main carriageway through the building, the two twin staircases, however, and their marble treads, naval-influenced wooden balustrades, and wide handrails are original to the building, and once led people from the twin entrances, now windows flanking the main entrance, to the upper floors. These features are an important original part of the heritage character and national significance of this building and contribute to the grandeur of that main lobby area. While the broad balusters and handrails are impressive in appearance, they are difficult to grip when ascending and descending the staircase. The new metal handrails will improve the functionality and safety for users. The design and method of installation has been carefully and thoroughly considered by facility staff and their consultants at Art Engineering. The use of an undermountain handrail at the same height as the historic handrail was actually influenced by the lobby staircase in the Fairmont Chateau Hotel at Lake Louise, Alberta. As per Standard 7 of the Standards and Guidelines, attaching the new rail to the staircases should be done using the gentlest means possible. And in accordance with Standard 12, the railings were to be removed in the future. The penetrations to the wood can be repaired and are discreet, with little impact to the essential integrity of the balustrade. The main lobby staircase in Kingston City Hall are one of the most impressive interior features of this National Historic Site. Every effort should be made to welcome all people into this iconic building and provide them with a safe and comfortable experience when exploring Kingston City Hall. Staff are of the opinion that the proposal will uphold the heritage conservation objectives, and we support this application. We did circulate. There are various technical comments that were provided to the applicant, included in conditions as appropriate. This was circulated to this committee. The three responding members provided no significant concerns in their comments. And so, Mr. Chair, we recommend its support, and this is our motion on the screen for your consideration.
Thank you. So you have one recommendation and 4 conditions. Committee members, comments, questions? Okay, members of the public? Not seeing any there. Need a mover and a seconder as printed. Moved by Janine, seconder. I have Councillor Oosterhoff. Further comments, further thoughts? And seeing none, I'll ask those in favour to raise their hands, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, with Jennifer away, and nobody voting against. So that is carried. Thank you, Ryan. And we move on to Princess Street, 291297 Princess.
Also me, Mr. Chair. 293 Princess. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this property actually includes 291 through 297 Princess Street. The application before us is the central unit at 293. The property is located on the north side of Princess Street at the northeast side of the intersection of Clergy Street. It includes a mixed-use road consisting of a 2.5-story and a 3-story limestone building built in the later part of the 19th century with commercial uses on the ground floor and residential uses above. The row includes 3 commercial units facing Princess Street. The property was designated in 2015 under Part 4. And the heritage attributes include, and I quote, excellent masonry work, unquote, on the building. And so what's before the committee today is an application under Section 33 to install a new wall sign. The sign will be for the new commercial tenant on the ground floor of 293 Princess. It's a Canadian juice and smoothie bar chain called Booster Juice. The sign is to be installed above the door and shop window and centered below the second floor sills. The sign will be 3 parts with a total length of 3.6 meters, including the spaces between them, and 0.7 meters tall at its tallest point. The sign will be about 9 centimeters thick and affixed to the stone wall in accordance with the city's masonry policy. Often as a result of taste and need, ground floor fenestration of commercial buildings in Kingston get altered over time. This particular building, however, is one of only a few along Princess Street which has retained its original ground floor door and window pattern. While limited portions of the stone wall will be covered with the new signage, the original openings will be retained, further by the use of a 3-part wall sign instead of a large single sign or awning sign. Less of the stone will be covered, and none of the windows and doors will be obstructed by the sign. Thus, opportunities to view the heritage attributes, the stone, will be conserved. In some situations, particularly smaller communities or rural areas, the use of vibrant colored signs could compete with heritage attributes on buildings or areas and detract from the cultural heritage value and contribution to the streetscape. However, in this case, the subject property is on Lower Princess Street. It's one of Kingston's main commercial nodes and includes a variety of commercial businesses and a wide array of signage types and colors. The dynamic collection of signs contributes to the vibrancy and character of this part of Kingston, as it has done for generations. The accents around the casing will also match the black trim on the windows, and staff have no concerns with the proposed location, style, and color of the signage or method of installation. This new sign appears to fit comfortably on the building in a location that one would commonly expect to see a sign. It will not interfere with the heritage attributes of the property and will be compatible with the heritage character of buildings in the area. We did circulate this. There are encroachment and access permits for the installation from our transportation team. The 2 members of committee who provided written comments on this application noted concerns regarding the size and of the proposed sign and suggested some reduction, and this was provided to the owners for consideration. Mr. Chair, this is our recommendation. As I mentioned, we support this application, and there are a number of requirements and conditions tied to that. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Ryan. Your dash comments are correctly recorded, I hope. Seeing no concerns, members of the public. And is there anybody on Zoom? No? Okay, and committee members, questions? Yes, Jane.
I'd like to apologize to staff and the applicant for not posting a comment on Dash. I usually try to do that, and I'm not sure how it slipped under my radar, but anyway, if I had, I would have noted that Schedule A description and reasons for designation statement of cultural heritage value and significance, physical design value, notes radiating voussoirs over window and door openings. I would like committee to consider that the sign is actually going to cover the window voussoirs, and I would like to also refer back to the property next door at 291 Princess. In April of 2021, a permit came to Heritage Kingston at that time, and included in the condition was the new sign mounting track raceway shall be installed above the ground floor stone voussoirs so that the letters may hang over the top portions of the voussoir, but they will remain largely visible. I would like to propose an amendment. Is this the right time for that? Great. My amendment would be, no. It's not a part 5, is it? Yeah. Can I propose that now? Or do we have to?
Sorry?
It's not on the floor yet.
No. you'll need to wait until the motion is on the floor,
Okay.
but explain what your amendment is going to be.
Okay, perfect. Anyway, I just want to point out that this sign will, at that size and height, it will cover a good portion of the voussoirs over the windows. Thank you.
Ryan, can I just get confirmation from you? You talked about, I believe, the proposed size of the sign had been changed? Or is it as we see on our page 267?
I have provided the comments, Mr. Chair, to the applicants. They are considering it, but I have not received direction from them to make changes to the proposal.
Okay, thank you. Further comments? Paul?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, that was my question as well. Have you received comments back from the owners? But it's been answered, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Other comments, questions?
Can I speak for a moment?
We have an applicant? Okay.
Okay, we are ready to reduce the size as it is a concern, and if we reduce the size by 15%, the most of by 15 reducing the size by 15%, it's only gonna be 3.68 or 67% of the wall area, total wall area, and it won't cover anything except the little portion of the brick and masonry. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Did you get clearly that size?
I didn't hear quite the size. My minutes wouldn't cover that, but Ryan.
Ryan, can you repeat what he's planning there?
Maybe ask him to redo. Ask him to
That's Mr. Ritesh. Mr. Ritesh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Sorry, can you give us again your proposed size of the sign?
Okay. Whatever was proposed before, we are gonna reduce it by 15%, so that all the woos on the windows, as well as other architectural aspects, they are not covered. As well as we are going to put it on the carrier box, like a little bar on which all the signs are going to be installed, so that there are very minimal attachment to the wall. And we are going to put it in the mortar, not in the brick or stone, so that all our architecture as well as the heritage property be conserved.
Ryan, your comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I understood the applicant correctly, I think he's agreeing to reduce the sign by 15%. As we noted, the original sign, I think only covered 6% of the wall as it was, which is well below what the city sign bylaw requires. And so I commend the applicant for considering the reduction.
Paul, your hand is up. You want to comment again, or was that your earlier comment?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I forgot to take my hand down.
Okay, that's fine. We cannot change this, can we, at this point? We can? Okay, Ryan?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, this is a Part 4 application under Section 33, so the committee is welcome to make amendments if they choose.
Page 268 then of the package, you have that the percentage of the sign area is 5.8%. And that presumably is the figure that needs to be changed, plus the placement. Am I right there?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I think we're all having some trouble hearing you over here. Is the master too far away from us?
Sorry, my comment, you okay now? Page 268 of the package gives the sign area as 5.8%. And was that an agreement to reduce that to, and what is the figure that we're looking at? Approximately. It should be 4.5%.
Mr. Chair, are we looking at, you want specific dimensions, or would it be more clean, I'm looking to the clerk on this one, to do an amendment to just suggest a reduction in the overall sign area by 50% as offered by the applicant? That might be a simpler way of doing it.
Had a lot of discussion over the McDonald's just next to this to see what they did. Further discussion on this, knowing that we're going to talk about changing the size of the sign? Okay, you have an amendment then, Jane.
Sorry, I did give it to Elizabeth, but I think if I understand the applicant, he wants to reduce it in size. And I understand why it should be reduced in size because of the format, I think. So I would say the new signs shall be reduced in size to ensure minimal overlap with the window voussoir stones. That way, the public can still continue to see those voussoirs, and the applicant can have a sign that the public can also see.
Okay, that's cleverly worded so that it goes both ways.
So we'll change that to reduced in size, as opposed to height.
Thinking to myself at this point, I'm trying to think where that amendment best comes, that alterations to the property be approved in accordance with details which were deemed complete, with said alterations to include the installation of a wall-mounted 3-part sign for the commercial tenant, and then the wording comes.
So where she has it right now, if you look at the page, she has it as an added 6.
Oh, as an added condition. Okay.
Yes.
Yep, that's the same thing. So condition 6 then talks about the size and the placement. We all clear on that? Paul's nodding. Good. Okay.
Comments on the amendment? Any discussion on the amendment that we need to go?
Yeah. So any comments on the amendment, which reduces the size of the sign and leaves the voussoirs as clear as possible? Jennifer?
Should we add the 15% to just be clear, or not necessary? Just comment.
I think it's clear as it stands. The intent is there, yeah. Other comments? Don?
Yes, I think it's a good motion. I think it perhaps beyond, well, I don't think anybody's concerned about the percentage of the wall area that's being covered. That's really pretty small. The real question is it going to significantly obscure the voussoir stones? And I think the motion covers that. Whether it's a reduction in height or a reduction in length won't have any effect on the on obscuring the voussoir stones, but so the height needs to be reduced, but I don't think we need to specify a percentage.
Other comments? Seeing none, then move the vote on the amendment dealing with, which is one of the one of the conditions dealing with the size of the sign.
I don't think we put the motion on the floor.
Did you not put the motion on the floor?
So she raised an amendment. Sorry, Mr. Chair, through you, what I'm just going to look around and verify. I believe we got lost in the conversation and we missed a procedural step. So we need to have the motion on the floor first in order to entertain the motion to amend. I think we have skipped over this part.
Okay. So, mover, Jane, seconder. You now have a motion on the floor talking about the size, basically, of the sign. It'll be an extra condition. Discussion? Seeing none, voting on the amendment. Those in favor? That's 7. Those opposed? That is carried. Back to the amended motion. Any further discussion on the amended motion? And seeing none, the amended motion then, which includes the height comment, moved by Jane, seconded by Dar. Oh, that was the motion. Sorry. The motion then is not me moved and seconded. The mover again is done, seconded by Jane.
Jane moved.
It's twisted around, okay. The amended motion. Discussion. Seeing none, those in favor? Those opposed? That carries. Philip, 6668 Earl.
Through Mr. Chair, one moment while I bring up the PowerPoint. Through Mr. Chair, this is a alteration proposal for 66 and 68 Earl, which has two separate approvals, but will be discussed together as they are an adjoining property with a common party wall. Both are changing their roof material and adding vents, while 66 Earl Street is also adding a new rear-facing dormer and skylights. The subject properties are located on the corner of the intersection of Earl and Wellington Street, in the heart of the Old Sydenham Heritage Conservation District. The subject properties are a 5-bay, 2-story stone double house with hammer-dressed limestone exterior and a hipped roof with 3 chimneys. Both properties are designated under Part 4 and 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act through designation bylaw 484-65 and the Old Sydenham Heritage Conservation District plan. The entire description of the relevant attributes can be found in the corresponding report. To begin, we will focus on the changes proposed for only 66 Earl. This is not about 68 Earl. The first set of changes are the installation of 2 skylights. One faces Earl Street and one faces King Street. The color is a dark bronze color and will be able to open a few inches for fresh air. The second set of changes include the creation of a new rear yard facing dormer with an associated bump out and balcony. The dormer will be marginally visible from Wellington Street and will be clad in shingles like the rest of the roof, which will be discussed in the next slide. This should mitigate some of the visual inconsistencies, especially those that could result from the dormer bump out itself. The balcony will be glass, which should draw attention, but this type of material is already present in the district, while also clearly differentiating this dormer as an addition from the rest of the building itself. Finally, the aluminum-clad French door with its additional glazing has the potential to stand out. As such, staff require that the finalized color be approved prior to installation. Next, we will consider the roof material change and new vents that are being proposed on both 66 and 68 Earl Street. The rationale for the roof material change provided by the applicant notes their architectural appropriateness for this new type of material, which you can see circled on the right-hand portion in green. Standing seam roofing system is less appropriate on a hipped roof, and the proposed material should draw less attention and allow the other attributes of the building to continue to stand proud. The newly proposed roof vents are located in the middle/rear of the roofs and will match the roof color. As a result, they will be nearly invisible from street level, and importantly, staff will be consulted on the finalized color of the roofing material and vents prior to installation. This is the first part of the recommendation before you. And this is the second part, and I just wanted to point out again that staff will be provided with the finalized colors of the French doors, siding, balcony, railing, glass product, metal shingles, and roof vents for review and approval, and this is for 66 Earl. The second part is now for 68 Earl here. Similar to the conditions for the previous, staff will be provided with the finalized color of the proposed shingles and roof vents for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dash comments? Are we okay with them? Can I get back to Zoom?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, through you. I'm just going to ask if Paul or Jelinka, can you please turn on your cameras? We do need you for quorum. Thank you.
Okay. Zoom comments, not Zoom comments. Dash comments, okay. Members of the public? And not on Zoom either. Okay, thank you. Committee members, questions? And I think we're dealing with the two at the same time, so either 66 or 68. Not seeing anything from home. Looking for then a motion. And are we doing this as one motion? Yeah. Okay, so it's the one motion. Boy, this is our big one. 2 pages. That firstly 66 have 6 alterations and 7 conditions, and that 68 have 2 recommendations and 7 conditions. Looking for a mover. I see Jennifer, thank you, and seconded by Don. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll put the question. Those in favor as printed? Those opposed? And that carries 6-0. Thank you very much. And thank you, Philip, for that, because I know that one got complicated as time went on. And it brings us to 12 Wellington Street again.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So this is an alteration proposal for 12 Wellington Street that focuses on non-utility alterations, namely a number of restoration works, renovations to entrances along the north and south elevations, minor alterations to the east elevation stairs, replacement of 2 period windows with Ontario Building Code rated windows, and a new fire escape. And just to follow up again, this is the same location as one of the other approvals we had today, which is why it is part 2. As noted in the previous proposal, the property abuts Lower Union Street, West, and Wellington Streets, as well as City Park. Further again, as noted in the previous application, the above elevation classifications correspond to the applicant plans, which will be shown again in 2 slides. So 12 Wellington Street is designated under Part 4 and 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act through designation bylaw number 84-258 and the Old Sydenham Heritage Conservation District Plan. The relevant heritage attributes are identified and talked about in more depth in the corresponding report. So before we begin looking here, if you look, well, those colors did not turn out as well as I wanted. So if you look at the bottom, I put a key to demonstrate what color corresponds to what changes being shown here, to demonstrate that some would be looking for restored features, removal of a feature, alteration of a feature, a net new feature, or is now not part of the approval anymore. Please refer back to the key at the bottom if you're looking for further understanding of what is being circled. Along the south elevation, the pink circles denotes restored features like the third floor dormer and first floor windows. The red circle denotes a removal, like the fire escape along this elevation. The purple circles denote alteration, such as a roof over the one-story addition, which will change from asphalt to mod bit roofing, the modern basement window, which will change from vinyl to aluminum-clad Marvin Ultimate slider windows, and concrete steps, which will be changing to steel, but with the same form. The green circle denotes a net new addition, in this case, the wooden cheeks for the grand entrance that face Wellington Street, and the light blue circle denotes an aspect of the application that is being removed. In this case, the proposed overhang is not being proposed over those existing steps on that elevation. Oh, my apologies. Along the east elevation, the third floor dormer windows will be restored. The front porch will be restored like for like as necessary. The modern basement windows will be removed and replaced with aluminum-clad Marvin Ultimate slider windows. The new railings will be added to the porch in a dark color for safety purposes. They will not be anchored to the historic portion of the porch. Along the west elevation, the third floor dormer windows will be restored. The two period windows will be replaced with a Marvin Ultimate aluminum-clad casement window and door with exterior mountain bars to address Ontario Building Code safety requirements. The removal of the sill of the central period window to better protect the roof of the one-story addition is also being proposed. However, that window will remain as it did not need to be changed for Ontario Building Code requirements. The fire escape will be altered to allow egress from the second story. Along the north elevation, which is the bottom right, the third floor dormer and first floor window of the addition will be restored. The existing one-story addition modern concrete stairs will be removed to make room for the fire escape reconfiguration. The modern basement window will be replaced with an aluminum-clad Marvin Ultimate slider window. The existing blinded windows will be reinstated and have new white aluminum-clad Marvin Ultimate windows with exterior mountain bars. The existing basement entrance will be redesigned with a new steel assembly guard and have an arched roof with an associated canopy that will be anchored on the concrete retaining wall. And the existing non-original basement door will be replaced with a new aluminum-clad frame and half-light door with associated transom. So the approval is broken down by facade alterations. This first part deals exclusively with the south and east elevations here. The second part deals with those alterations to the west and north elevations. The entire list of these alterations are included in the associated report. And I wanted to note that Heritage staff will be circulated detailed designs and photos for the proposed Ontario Building Code fire-rated window/door/transom along the west elevation for review and approval prior to installation, and that the central window along that west elevation that will be having its sill moved will be restored. Further, all removed sills and period windows shall be retained for future use. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. Dash comments, all okay? Good. Members of the public? Nothing on Zoom, okay. Committee members, questions? Done?
Well, I should apologize that I didn't manage to submit comments on Dash. I guess I was confused by the two different applications and thought I had done it. This is a very complex project, and really would have been nice to have a site visit or a pre-consultation. It's hard to absorb all the information. On the whole, I think I'm reasonably satisfied with the plans. I have a couple of questions. I couldn't really understand this business of moving the sill of one of the windows. Is it going to be moved up or down, and why is it necessary?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can address this question. My understanding of moving the sill, which was a pretty big topic of conversation with the agent for the applicant, in this case, it's going to be removed, not moved. And the reason it's being removed is because it right now rests on top of the roof. That's for that one-story addition. As such, they're worried that when they redo the roof, it will create further damage that could make the roof deteriorate quicker and then cause water egress. And that's why that's why they removed it, but we wanted to make sure that it would be retained for future reuse as necessary, because it is a loss and we do recognize that, but we also do recognize that we want to protect the building for the long term. Thank you.
I also have a concern about the replacement of the basement windows. It'd be nice to see a picture of the house from the front if that's possible, but the replacement windows are slider windows, and if you look at the facade,
Through Mr. Chair, I brought the picture back up just here just to show Mr. Taylor. Thank you.
okay, yeah, there we are. A little bit hard to see, but I guess in the upper right is what I'm talking about. You can see that basement window that's got a red thing about. Those windows are arched windows, and I'm sure the original windows were arched just as the windows above it are. And so I think the replacement windows should retain the arch configuration. Slider windows are pretty much a modern development, and those are probably arched casement windows. And as it happens, if you look across the street at 7 Wellington, their basement windows are arched casement windows. And those are the ones, or those are the windows that you should try to put in place there. I mean, they can be, you don't have to have storm windows. It can be built with insulated glass. But I strongly hope that the applicants will consider going to arched casement windows for the basement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jane?
I'm just going to follow up on Dawn's comment about the basement windows, because I commented on it in Dash as well. There actually is photo evidence in one of Dr. McKendry's books of the original basement windows, early photo anyway, 2/2 arched top. And best practice and most suitable would be to replicate this, casement windows. There's a lot of money obviously being spent on this property, and in general, the proposal and final result will be historically really quite acceptable. But I would be really sad to see slider windows on that, on those basement windows. Sometimes we discount basement windows, but on a property with the height of the basement as it is there, I really think that the applicant should consider something more complementary, that is arched top basement windows. And in terms of the scope of that whole application, I think there is only 4 basement windows. Perhaps I'm wrong. I think it would be money well spent for the future of this property and the historical presence. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments? And seeing none, look for a mover and a seconder as printed. It's 5 recommendations, 14 conditions.
And if I may, is it too late for one more question? It wasn't the porch facing the park. I gather it's going to be removed and rebuilt. And all I could see on the plans were metal railings in a very plain utilitarian pattern. The railings that are there already have a little bit of decoration. I think it's sort of scrolls or initials or something into it. And I think it would be a pity if, since this is an entrance to the house, that the metal railing should be so utilitarian in appearance. It's okay for the fire escape. Nobody expects anything from the fire escape, but this is an entrance that had a little more decorative railing. And so I hope, well, I don't know what railing is proposed because it wasn't really described in any detail, but I think it would be important to have a bit more decoration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Other further comments? If not, then looking for a mover and a seconder as printed. Jelinka moving and seconding. I'll see Janine first of all. Further comments on a complicated, I think we all realize the complication of the application. Thank you, Philip, for being so precise on it, but seeing nothing then, vote those in favor as printed. It is. Those opposed, and that carries by 6 to nobody opposing. Thank you very much. We move on to 81 Gore Street. Brian, I think that's you. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Anyone, Gore Street is in the heart of Sydenham District, north side of Gore Street, a mid-block between King East and Wellington Street. The property includes a 2-story brick-clad dwelling built in the 1840s, with the brick cladding likely added in the late 19th century. The property is designated under Part 5 of the district, and it's recently been discovered that the brick veneer on the main front wall of the building is showing concerning signs of deterioration. An application under Section 42, Part 5 of the Act, is submitted to look for approval to dismantle, catalog the bricks, rebuild the limestone foundation, and accurately reconstruct the brick wall using as many of the original units as possible. It's anticipated that at least 30% of the bricks will need to be replaced. The applicants are proposing to use, quote, heritage quality bricks or reclaimed bricks if possible. The limestone foundation will be repaired with locally sourced limestone. The existing basement windows are to be filled with stone as part of the foundation repairs, but slightly recessed to retain the memory of the original openings. An overall assessment of the wall, cladding, masonry of the building, and including the stone foundation, was part of the previous approval in April for this application, or for this property. The extent, however, of the deterioration is far worse than anticipated. According to the applicants, they have consulted with a structural engineer who was gravely concerned about the stability of the wall, the front wall, and urges prompt action. So together with Mason Brian Nuri, the applicants are proposing to dismantle the entire front veneer, repair the stone foundation, and then carefully rebuild as close as possible to the original design, plus the previous approved additional courses above the windows. The careful cataloging, of course, the masonry and the strict attention to detail when rebuilding will be necessary to conserve the heritage character of the property and its contribution to the district's attributes. The owners are committed to the retention, conservation, adaptive reuse of this modest building and should be commended for their dedication and investment into the preservation and the heritage value and character of not only this building but the district itself. The heritage planning staff are of the opinion that the proposal conforms to the intent, goals, and policies of the district plan and should be approved. We circulated this application. Building permits, of course, are required, as well as structural review by an engineer. Our transportation team notes access and encroachment permits required. There are requirements from Kingston Hydro to have safe clearance from the hydro lines or isolation of the hydro lines during the work. All of that is included as conditions of approval, which in the committee or in the recommendation before committee. The 3 committee members that responded comments noted no significant concerns. So, Mr. Chair, we recommend approval of this with the conditions on your screen.
Good, thank you very much. Dash comments are all okay? Thank you. Members of the public seem to have all gone on that. No, nobody there. That's not that. Members of the public, no. Committee questions, comments, thoughts? No. Somebody like to move the 1 recommendation and 8 conditions that we have there? Jennifer? And the seconder, I see Jelinka. Further last comments? And seeing none, ask those in favor to raise their hands. Those opposed, which is none of you, so that's 6-0. Thank you very much. Well, how about that? Let's change books. And we have a working report from the, which one is it from? Heritage Properties Working Group. That needs to be approved or accepted. So that is of the September 22nd meeting. Do I have a mover, Don, and a seconder to accept that? Please. Oh, thank you very much, Janine. Any questions on that? It's a straightforward meeting, looking ahead. Okay, thank you. Voting then, those in favor of accepting that report. Those opposed, you have a report accepted. Emergency approvals.
Just quickly, Mr. Chair, roof repair and chimney repair on William Street where a tree branch fell. The Grad Club at Queens had some urgent repairs to their chimney. And finally, the TET Center had security concerns and are putting in a few little security cameras. Those are our emergency approvals.
Good, thank you very much. There are no motions. Any notices of motion? Other business. Do you want to do this now, or do you want to send out a...
This is just to comment on Bill 23, and again, I think I said it largely earlier when we commented. There will be a report going to Council on December 6th, I believe that report will be going, which will summarize all of the changes that are coming through Bill 23, not only to the Heritage Act, but to the Planning Act and other associated legislative processes. The comment period is open with the ERO right now. Any person in the public can comment. It closes on November 24th, so if members of committee were interested themselves in issuing comment, the changes on the whole for heritage are largely to do with as yet undefined processes to amend, update, and potentially remove heritage conservation districts, to put timelines on our need to move listed properties to designated, as well as some alteration to the criteria that need to be used for designation processes. There are others in addition to that, but those are sort of the high-level ones. Again, when we have our comments prepared from staff, we will share that with committee as an item of correspondence on the December report. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that's probably the best way. There's yet another email this morning that came in from another group with comments on this, so please, if you can read all that's going on, it's major changes. Next meeting is December 21st, so you can't go away early for Christmas. Anything else we've forgotten? Otherwise, look for a motion to adjourn. Jane, Don, thank you very much. Anybody objecting? Thank you for your time. I know it was a long one. It was 2 meetings in one, but thank you, and see you again in December.